Hey everyone, Leer here. Welcome back to the Monday Meta Report. For the last 7 days I look at the most popular and most promising decks and how they performed. Let's dive into the data and see what archetypes you should play and those you should prepare to face. Sorting Balko's meta tier list by play rate, we see the following. Any Jhin or Jinny is a massive crowd favorite, sporting an 11.6% play rate. This number was even higher during earlier days of the pack. As you can see, that Bard has crept up to second place with a 6.4% play rate, whereas Nautilus Maokai, or as known by everyone called Deep, takes third place with a 5% play rate. Furthermore, Lissandra Leer or Thralls reaches fourth place with a 4.5% play rate, and Lux Iliao or Ilux follows with a 3.2% play rate. You might have heard of Lux Iliao or Ilux, and it was made popular by Kurira, a streamer, in the early days of the patch. At a 2% play rate, we find any Ezreal, Pyke Rek'Sai, or Lurk/Urk, Zoe Bard, Iliao Jarvan 4, Twisted Fate. It's still not really decided if you should play Twisted Fate, maybe Garen as a third champ as in Iliao Jarvan 4. And good old Ezreal Caitlyn Tribeam. Turning to win rates, we get this graph. Yuumi Pantheon Demacia, or PhDE, is by far the most successful champion with a close to 58% win rate. Sorry, not champion, but deck. Iliao Twisted Fate J4, the small sibling of PhDE, you could say, comes in second with a 56.5% win rate. Shares a 56% win rate with Misfortune Quinn, also called Scouts. Ilux reaches place 4 with a 55.3% win rate, and is the only archetype with a 55% win rate. At 54% win rate, we find Tribeam, Helios Fizz or Aphelios, and Taric Poppy. Close it out, Urk or Lurk, Diego Shurima or San Diego, and Deep all share a 53% win rate. You might have noticed in the play rate and win rate graph, I will go back to it, that the top 4 decks are all Demacia. And even stuff like Poppy Taric, for example, is hardly a new archetype, but is still performing well. And this is what I like to call, due to the Patricide Protector combo. Basically, as long as the deck runs Patricide Broadwing and Brightsteel Protector, you have a top-notch list in the current meta. The reason is that those cards are pretty effective against Jinny, the by far most played deck in the meta. Patricide Broadwing, or Fleet Feather Tracker also works, is a pretty nasty counter to Annie, as Annie, you know it, she has 0 health, and Patricide Broadwing or Fleet Feather Tracker can challenge her on turn 2 or 3 when you are attacking and kill her for free. But Patricide Broadwing can also challenge other Jhin units. You know, the followers Jhin allows you to play, especially attack skill units like Legion Saboteur or Boom Crew Rookie are pretty vulnerable to these challenges. And Brightsteel Protector lets you trade usually 2 for 1, especially against Argo decks that want or need to attack you even if you have a unit with barrier up. This discussion brings us to the meta-defining deck, Jinny. Never had a positive win rate like Mono Shurima did last season, but the deck still gets overplayed a lot. Hence, archetypes that do well against Jinny get a spotlight, so it's not necessarily a requirement. Actually, that Bard is in quite a similar position, so let's look at their matchup table together. We can see a sort of duality going on, with the exception of Ezreal Annie, where both decks struggle against, and Lissandra Leer or Thralls, where both decks are good against. And with duality, I mean the matchup tables basically matchups complement each other. For example, that Bard does well against Jarvan Iliao, and any Jin does bad against it. Same goes for Lux Illaoi or Lurk. Also, while Z Bard struggles against Ginny and Ezreal Annie, it is slightly favored into most other of the top meta decks, as this matchup graph shows. So Z Bard is not that bad of a deck, even though it doesn't have a positive win rate at the moment. On the other hand, as mentioned before, most archetypes prey on Ginny, and thus leaves the deck not many good matchups. You can see that any Jin basically only has 2 good matchups out of the top 7 or top 6 with mirror match excluded, which is Z Bard and Thralls. Moving on, Thralls and Deep are 2 archetypes that quickly rose to the top during the Ginny hype. And personally, I was quite surprised when I saw that Thralls isn't even favored against the deck. You would expect that both these decks, which rose early, would be preying on the Ginny hype, but actually that's not the case for Thralls. Especially with Iliao Ionia lists getting more popular, Thralls and Deep struggle a little bit nowadays. So big units that outgrow Frostguard, Thrall, the unit, the 8/8 Overwhelm unit that spawns out of Thrall, nobody knows its name, or the Deep units or sea monsters are our natural enemy. Oh, so this sentence was complicated. What I mean is that, for example, Illaoi Javan 4 is able to grow big units, big tentacles that are bigger than 8/8 Frostguard Scroll, for example, and thus just out-trade it. And that's a problem for Thralls or Deep units. And the same also goes for PhDE's Fated units. So that's also why PhDE is doing well. Nevertheless, Deep still found its way into top cut thanks to its great matchup into Ginny. So if we shortly go back to the win rate graph, we can see that Deep still showed up at 53.5% and Thralls didn't make it in. And that's mostly due to Deep being really good against Ginny. Whoops. Lastly, Tribeam has regained some of its former glory, now sitting at a 54.7% win rate. With some of these LP donors at the top, like Ginny and Z Bard, it's unclear if it will stay this way, but let's appreciate it for a moment. I think most people like Ezreal Caitlyn, so why not try it out at this moment? Tribeam with its removal-oriented playstyle is naturally good against aggro decks like Ginny, and since in the last meta it did well against PhDE, it's also great against Illaoi decks that rely on tentacles that are prone to removal like Disintegrate or Scorched Earth. The deck likely struggles against Z Bard's Handbuff though, and does pretty horrendous versus Thralls, despite their access to Scorched Earth, which I believe comes from not really being able to close out the game even if you Scorched Earth a Thrall. But I don't have much experience personally. So now that we talked about the meta staples, let's talk about some honorable mentions that didn't make it into this video or article because they aren't played enough or barely missed the top cut. It almost feels like a scam doing this section this week, as there are so many novel decks anyways, but on the other hand it's best time to try out some more experimental stuff while the meta is still this chaotic. The first deck I want to cover is Iliao Ionia. A pretty famous streamer, Grandpa Rogi, swears this deck is good, so who am I to deny him? The Ionian version of Iliao utilizes tentacles even more than the Demacia versions, with cards like Ghost and Guru Leader. You probably don't know what Guru Leader does. It's a 3-cost unit that on play lets a 1-cost unit start a free attack. So you have a big tentacle, the tentacle is a 1-cost unit, you give it Ghost, attack with it, And then you play Boo Leader on it again and it attacks again with the elusive keyword. That's basically the idea. Since it relies on a big tentacle so much, we run more protection spells like Syncopation and Deny. We also run a One of Memories Cloak, not sure if that's optimal, but we also run Twin Disciplines and Spirit Refuge, for example. With our lack of Patricide Broadwing and Brightstreet Protector, the combo we talked about earlier, the deck becomes a little less solid in the early game and is more combo or OTK focused. There's not much data on the deck, but Iliao Ionia sits at a 52% win rate after over 950 games in the past 2 days. There's also a version getting popular that runs Set as a second champ, so this might also be worth a try. For our next honorable mention, we will be looking at Elise Katarina Viego, and yeah, you had it right, it's another Katarina deck. Even after Friendly Nihilist top cut the last seasonal with the Katarina deck in the EMEA chart, this was apparently not enough. We even had Ari Katarina pretty much as a regular in last season's honorable mention section, so this might be the next Katarina deck to stay, who knows. Our access to Noxus allows Elise Katarina Viego to play cards like Legion Deserter, to benefit from the everywhere buffs of Encroaching Mist. So Legion Deserter is a new card, you might not know what it does, but it gains all the buffs that basically give a buff that's printed everywhere. So for example, Encroaching Mist, when it's spawned, says give +1/+1 to Encroaching Mist everywhere. Because it's an everywhere buff, Legion Deserter also gets it. While the deck lacks protection spells for Viego, it's more removal focused, with Ravenous Flock and Disintegrate, as you can see. And it's also able to withstand some aggro with Arachnoid Sentry and House Spider. Thus, Viego Noxus does quite well into aggro decks like Ginny, but struggle a little against that Bard and Pike Rek'Sai. But all of this is small sample size, so no guarantees given here. The archetype sports a breathtaking 60% win rate after over 600 games in the last 2 days. So if you happen to test the deck, tell me how useful Katarina was in your games. Maybe I will test it myself. And the last deck I want to talk about is Jace Heimerdinger, Shadow Isles. Jace Heimerdinger has been going off since the late days of last season, where we could see it lurk in the top cut. Now it's back again with a 55.5% win rate of over 1,500 matches in the past 2 days. Heimer Jace excels at controlling the game thanks to its access to Shadow Isles cards. As a control deck, it naturally does well against aggro decks like Ginny, whereas cards like Vengeance and Thermogenic Beam shoot down the many-armed Dream of Ilaoi. Its only bad matchups appear to be Lurk and Thralls. And especially with Thralls slowly going out of the meta, we might see Jace Heimerdinger become even more powerful. If you want to learn the archetype from a top-notch player, there's a premium guide available over at masteringruneterra.com by Jason Sational. Well, this concludes this week's chaos. Let's wait and see where the meta currently is going next week. And yes, we could say the meta is far from settled. Maybe we arrive at Silent Waters, where no sea monsters lurk in the deep. I hope you learned something today to improve your game. You might even feel a little courageous and try out an honorable mention. Either way, have fun on the ladder and see you next week.